Hello everyone, I'm Yu Kyung-un. Today we are going to talk about a very simple but very important question. What is psychology? When people hear the word psychology, they often imagine things like mind reading, counseling, MBTI, or motivational advice. And yes, those things can be related to psychology, but psychology is actually much broader and much deeper than most people think. In this video, we'll explore what psychology really is, what it was created, what psychologists study, and how psychology connects to our everyday lives. First, let's start with the definition. Psychology is commonly defined as the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. There are two key ideas here. The first is behavior, the second is mental processes. Behavior refers to actions that can be observed from the outside, things like talking, studying, avoiding people, getting angry, or playing games. Mental processes are internal experiences that cannot be directly seen. Thoughts, emotions, memories, anxiety, motivation, imagination, and decision making are all examples. So psychology asks questions like why do people behave the way they do? Why do we feel emotions? Why do we remember some things and forget others? Why do people make irrational decisions? Psychology tries to answer these questions, but here's an interesting problem. If the mind cannot be directly seen, how can we study it scientifically? This is exactly why psychology emphasizes science. For example, imagine someone says people work harder than when they receive praise. That sounds reasonable, but psychology does not stop at intuition or opinion. Psychologists test ideas through experiments. They might divide participants into groups, praise one group more than other, and then compare the results. In other words, psychology is not just giving life advice or talking about feelings. It uses observation, experiments, evidence, and statistics to understand human beings. That's also why psychology is closely connected to statistics and research methods. Many people are surprised when they discover that psychology students often study data analysis, experimental design, and statistical testing. Now, let's talk about how psychology began. Humans have always been curious about the mind. Ancient philosophers like Plato and Aristotle thought deeply about memory, emotion, and human nature, but psychology originally belonged more to philosophy than science. That changed in the late 19th century. A German scholar named Wilhelm Wundt created one of the first psychology laboratories and began studying the human mind scientifically. Because of this, Wundt is often called the father of psychology. As psychology developed, many different approaches appeared. One major approach was behaviorism. Behaviorists believed psychology should focus on observable behavior rather than invisible thoughts. One famous example is the experiment by Ivan Pavlov. Pavlov repeatedly rang a bell before giving food to dogs. Eventually, the dogs began to salivate simply from hearing the bell, even without food. This became known as classical conditioning. Later, B. F. Skinner studied how rewards and punishment shape behavior. For example, behavior followed by rewards tends to increase, while behavior followed by punishment tends to decrease. These ideas still influence education, parenting, and behavior training today. At the same time, some psychologists argued that humans are more than machines reacting to stimuli. One of the most famous figures was Sigmund Freud. Freud emphasized the unconscious mind. He believed that hidden desires, fears, and childhood experiences could strongly influence behavior without us realizing it. For example, a person who repeatedly struggles in relationships might unknowingly be affected by past emotional experiences. Today, many parts of Freud's theories are criticized because they are difficult to test scientifically. However, the idea of the unconscious mind still has enormous influence on psychology and culture. Another important Another important field is cognitive psychology. Cognitive psychology studies thinking itself. How do humans process information? Why do we make mistakes in judgment? Why do biases exist? Why are some memories strong while others disappear quickly? Psychologists discovered that humans are not always rational. We like to believe we make logical decisions, but emotions and biases influence us constantly. Advertisements affect us. First impressions affect us. Fear affects us. Even small changes in wording can influence our choices. Psychology studies these hidden patterns in human thinking. Psychology is also connected to almost every part of life. Educational psychology studies how people learn. Clinical psychology focuses on mental health problems such as depression, anxiety, and trauma. Social psychology studies how people behave in groups. Industrial and organizational psychology examines workplaces, leadership, and motivation. 엄마. Sports psychology studies focus and mental performance in athletes. Consumer psychology studies why people buy certain products. So psychology is not limited to therapy rooms or counseling centers. It affects schools, businesses, social media, marketing, politics, relationships, and even YouTube. So why should we study psychology? Learning psychology will not suddenly give you the power to lead minds, but it can help you understand human beings, including yourself, more realistically. For example, instead of simply thinking, I'm lazy, psychology may help you realize that your behavior is influenced by stress, sleep, habits, environment, reward, emotions, and many other factors. Psychology teaches us that humans are emotional, imperfect, and deeply influenced by their surroundings, an understanding that can make us more thoughtful toward both ourselves and other people. Of course, psychology also has limitations. Human beings are incredibly complex. Unlike mathematics, psychology cannot always provide perfect answers. People react differently depending on personality, culture, experiences, and environment. That is why psychology is best understood not as absolute truth, but as an ongoing scientific effort to understand human nature. To summarize today's video, psychology is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. It explores emotions, memory, learning, personality, relationships, decision making, and much more. Psychologists use observation, experiments, and scientific methods to better understand human beings. And psychology is deeply connected to everyday life, from school and work to relationships and social media. In a way, psychology is humanity's attempt to understand itself. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. See you in the next video.